Are these chairs architecturally appropriate?
Yes. So if you could give us the article number and just sort of an overview of the rationale, purpose, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Well, I'd sort of like to start. I'm Curtis Barnes, by the way, sponsor of the 3 articles relating to the HDC, and thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts with you. There's an old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The HDC is a good thing, but I think it's not broke, it's got some cracks. So the objective of this exercise is to bring some attention to some of the things that I hope would be done, and I know there are many things that are currently being worked on. And it reminds me of the disadvantage of citizens' articles. We have to put them in November and December, and then everyone else, like the selectmen or the boards, get to wait until March to come up with various other things. As everyone knows, having read in the Inquirer and Mirror, there have been a number of meetings with town council to address certain questions with the HDC. They're going through a process of reorganization, which hopefully are addressing those questions. But at the same time, there are other groups that are working on the problem as well. There is the Citizens for Sensible Preservation, which is, I guess, a private group that is trying to work on what I call details or tactical questions. I'm viewing some of the things that I'm addressing as more strategic, more basic, long-range questions. And they're actually not the same kinds of things. How you fill out an application is an operational question. How you select members to serve on the HDC is a broader and more significant issue, I think. I would invite everyone to get a copy of the Preservation Trust memorandum that has been distributed excuse me, at several of the meetings, the organizational meetings. And I talked with the director of the trust the other day and said, in some of these discussions, I have invited people to go online and get your report, Michael. He told me on Friday it's not online. But it is going online. And it certainly reviews, this is an independent study that the trust has done. I think it's exceedingly informative and very comprehensive. And they are going to put it online, but if you want a copy of this report, they've said to call the trust and they will email it to you. One of the dilemmas in addressing my articles is I submitted 3 articles and someone decided that they were going to be listed in a different order than what I had intended. So I really see these articles as 3 parts. The first part is what I call back to basics, and that is the question of whether the HDC should have jurisdiction over, that's Article 62, the sections of the town that were outlined in the original HDC enabling acts. 1955 was when these acts were first submitted to the great General Court. And I would note, and it relates to what I'm saying, the commission exists of 5 members who shall be appointed by the selectmen. The original act said appoint by selectmen. Secondly, It is applicable to the old historic Nantucket District and the old historic Sconset District. So that article, going back to basics, is we should be looking at the historic parts of the island and focusing on those areas. But as I said, from the time citizens were required to put their articles in, and now there has been tremendous discussion. And as that has evolved, and I've been involved in it, it seems to me that limiting to those two areas alone is not sufficient. So among other things, I can see a value of the HDC maintaining jurisdiction over the whole island. The problem is we apply old historic standards to places like Tom Nevers and Surfside that weren't in the original articles. So my feeling as we go through this process is that it would be appropriate to have applications go to the HDC, but that the majority of those applications should be reviewed by staff and then brought to the commissioners if there are significant reasons to discuss them in detail. But that the commission should focus on the basic areas primarily. That comes back to another problem, which is we don't have enough staff. The staff works hard. The Preservation Trust report, for example, talks about the analogous areas that they've compared are Boston and Cambridge. Boston has 6 staff members plus an archaeologist. Cambridge has 5 full-time staff members. Nantucket has 2, and they share their support staff. It's simply not adequate, and we do need more staff to implement any changes that we want to make. The basic question that I would address in the 3 articles is whether the commissioners should be elected by popular vote or appointed by the selectmen. According to the Nantucket Preservation Trust report, this is the only commission out of 100 in the Commonwealth where they are elected by popular vote. There are elected commissioners in the Cape Cod Commission, but that is also, there are 6 towns in the Cape Cod Commission, and that has appointed members from each town as well as elected. Everyone else is appointed. Boston is appointed, Cambridge is appointed. And it seems to me that if we focused on that article at this town meeting, and it would be the one I would stand up and argue for more strongly, then it would resolve my other article, which is the article of term limits. Because if the selectmen do appoint, then as appointments run out, you apply to be reappointed. And when we look at things like the Airport Commission, the new Board of Health that went from selectmen to an appointed board, we look at CONCOM, we look at the ZBA. All of our boards here are appointed by the selectmen. I think they've been doing a very good job in encouraging people to come forward, and I think these boards are very strong. So around the 3 articles today, I'm now focused on going back to the appointment by selectmen, and I think the operational questions will be worked out over time, which FinCom has suggested. And then we don't need to have the term limit article anyway. So I hope that we will at least address that major article at town meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. And thank you for focusing it on the one action that would be the one that would resolve everything.
Get something done.
Okay, good. Next, I'd like to ask Linda Williams, who's chair of the HDC, to speak for maybe 6, 7, 8 minutes in your point of view, and then I will ask for a show of hands of how many people will want to ask questions, and we'll take the questions, and we'll also leave it open for Tim if he wants to say anything, okay?
I was sort of unprepared for the general discussion. I thought we were taking each article by itself, so that's sort of how my presentation is rolling at the moment. But I will take the one that Curtis seems to be most focused on. The elected versus appointed. There's probably no way to know why it went from appointed to elected, except that the appeal process for the HDC runs through the selectmen. Unlike the planning board or the zoning board, which go to land court, the selectmen are the appealing board or the appellant board. You cannot have, just as a simple matter, it's inappropriate to have the appointing board also be the appellant board. So in other words, the selectmen would appoint the HDC members, and then the HDC members' decisions would be appealed back to the board that put them on there. I think there was probably a reason why we became elected. But it's also part of the democratic process. The accountability of public officials to the electorate is very important to almost all of us. When I was on the Charter Commission many years ago, I don't remember how long ago that was, I was one of those rabble-rousers, as usual, that wanted all regulatory boards to be elected. That included the Zoning Board and the Concom. Right now, it's the Planning Board and the HDC. Because it takes it out of the political payback, vindictiveness, trying to seed the boards with your favorite people. It takes it from being in the public venue and by appointing them, and puts it back into the Board of Selectmen, where only 3 people can make a big difference on the HDC or any other regulatory board. I don't think it should ever become appointed. I think we need to be responsive to the public, because all roads on this island that are architecturally related come back to the HDC. And we need to be directly, democratically responsive to the public and not to a majority of the Board of Selectmen. Why would the voters want to isolate the HDC from you? It really will limit your choices. If we're doing a good job, vote us back in. If we're doing a terrible job, vote us back out. We're a pretty public body. It's hard to hide at the HDC. It's too important a body to be subjected to the control by another body. If you don't like us, remove us. Basically, that's the message that we want to convey. Of all the boards and commissions, the HDC needs to be independent. For precisely what I mentioned earlier, everything comes to the HDC except a split rail fence out of town. We hear anywhere from 80 to 150. When I first came on 15 years ago, it was 150 cases a week. No other board in the state hears that many cases or meets on a weekly basis to meet the public need. Sure, we could meet once a month, but people's projects here would be delayed, causing an economic hardship on people. It would appear to be a solution by Mr. Barnes in search of a problem. If the argument is that people just do not want to run for office and are more likely to put their names in for an appointed position, that is a bogus smokescreen, to be blunt. Time and again, no one runs for the HDC. This year I'm up and not one person decided to run. Do we want people to run? Of course we want people to run, but it meets every week for 4 hours every Tuesday, sometimes 4 hours every Thursday, and every other week we take viewings and drive around on our own nickel all over this island, including taking boats over to Tuckernuck, which I've done, or going out for a viewing in a boat up in Pacamam. Very few people have that kind of time except for the dedicated people that are already on there. I don't know why we all run again, except that once you get in, you can't get out. To think that people would come out of the woodwork and put their name in for the HDC at the Board of Selectmen and run themselves through that dog and pony show is really not going to happen. We have open seats for years sometimes on the HDC. It just takes a lot of work. In the end, the HDC is accountable to you and the community, both the non-voting taxpayers, the tourists, and those who live here year-round. We need to be above that political fray and not subject to the whims of whoever you elect for the Board of Selectmen. Don't give up your right to decide who you want on the HDC, preserve the democratic process, and support the Finance Committee's motion, which I believe was to take no action on this article. As I said, as Kurt mentioned earlier, we are in the process of revamping ourselves, trying to bring ourselves into the 21st century before that changes. And we do have process problems. We know that. We have response to the public's needs. We know that. We have problems there. We know sometimes we get a little far afield. We're trying to establish new protocols, a smoother process, and working with the administration and the town to fix that. We're not oblivious to the fact that there's a great hue and cry in the public that started last fall that we've got to change. And we're going to change. It's just that after 60 years of, almost 60 years of legislation, enabling legislation being passed, it's not going to come overnight. And we are working with a group that Curtis mentioned. Nobody's doing this in a vacuum. We're very exposed and very willing to work with all the groups that have an issue. And if anybody in the public has problems or suggestions for the HDC on how it might run more efficiently and more responsibly, we want those comments. You can come to the meeting under public comment every Tuesday at the beginning of the meeting and make those statements, or you can email me. My email's out there. But we do want to hear from the public, and not just the designers and not just the engineers or the lawyers that we deal with every week. We want to hear from the people that are directly affected by the HDC's rulings, whether it's a fence or a paint color or whatever it is. We have to be responsive to you, and I think being appointed would take that and remove us from the public by too far and make us more of a political football than we already are. Thank you. And that's just that one. I mean, do you want me to deal with the other two? Or?
Sure, we have a few more minutes.
Curtis has graciously backed off of the restricting the HDC to the old historic districts. Anybody who's been to the Jersey Shore before the hurricane knows that Nantucket was headed in that direction in 1970 when they passed they changed the enabling legislation to include the entire island. What keeps people coming back here is the sense of history, the absolute control that we have over the way Nantucket looks, whether you're in the old historic district or outside the old historic districts. This is not just an island of beaches, playing golf, and eating out. This is an island, it's the only intact historical community, architecturally, of the entire northeast seaboard areas. We can't lose that. If we lose that, we're going to lose a large part of what makes Nantucket special and our economic viability. They learned that 140 years ago when it became a non-whaling based economy. They went after the tourists, and they knew the one thing that they had to market was the historical and aspect of Nantucket. In fact, in 1870, they lost a third of the population, and there were so many vacant buildings. Some of the buildings were dismantled and sold to people down in Connecticut, because somebody's actually seen them. We don't want to lose what makes Nantucket special and what brings people here and why we all chose to live here. Even along the Old Kings Highway on the Cape, 6A, driving up and down 6A is beautiful. It's like driving up and down Main Street here, but you go less than 1/8 of a mile off of 6A, and you're back to McDonald's, motels, you name it, you got it. That's what was happening here in 1970 with Tristram's Landing, with all the condo units. I believe they're condos or timeshares. They saw those going up in Madigan and said, that's not happening. So they made the entire island the historic district. We do not, contrary to what Curtis said, apply in-town regulations for the, or guidelines for the old historic districts to Tom Nevers or Pocomo or any of those other outlying areas. Obviously, we apply gray shingles and we don't allow materials that are not natural, like plastic trim and things like that. But we do take a less stringent approach to structures that are out in the other areas because there was no historical context. I didn't even go to Tom Nevers when I was a kid until I was 18 years old. Why would I go? There was nothing out there but the Navy base. So times have changed. So we tend to, and Tom Nevers, let's say, will make the houses look fairly similar, but within their own context. We have to take it in context. We can't apply those standards to outside of town. It's just not practical. So I don't think it's appropriate to do that. That was just my comment on that one. Term limits, I think, is a disaster. The HDC has one of the largest learning curves of any board in the 30 years I've been serving on boards, and I've served on dozens. You just can't get it after 3 years. You've got the guidebook, you've got the neighborhood context, you've got to learn how to look at a plan. We're dealing with engineered plans sometimes on these bigger projects. You just don't get it. And what you do want on the HDC is experience, is an ability to move the process along, because you can look at a set of plans and pick off what is wrong or what needs to be changed, tell the applicant, move on. Every 6 or 7 minutes, we have to move on. Right now, we're doing 80 to 90 cases a week. And old business takes a great deal of time. That's usually 15 minutes per case. But if you are constantly throwing newbies onto this board that have no institutional knowledge or understanding of what a historic structure is versus a structure in Pocomo or some other outlying area, if you don't understand what a roof pitch is, you don't understand what true divided light means as opposed to simulated divided light, there's a myriad of things you have to learn, and it takes so long to do it. After 15 years, I can look at a set of plans and go, yeah. 8 years ago, not so fast. If you are constantly doing that, you will slow down the process, ruin the continuity, and take all institutional knowledge out. I think that's probably the worst of the thing that we could possibly do to the HDC. It would just emasculate it. But if anybody wants to get involved in the process, by all means, come and get on our advisory groups, because we have advisory groups from the various times. Sconset has one, Mattocket has one, Tuckernuck has one. Get involved. Run for the HDC. Fill these vacant seats. I mean, we need new blood, but not enforced. It has to be somebody who wants to do it, who wants to pick up the knowledge to do it, and take us out of the football, the political football arena. I just think these are 3 of the worst things that could happen to the HDC until we get our act together with public input over the next year or 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I'd like to get a reading on just roughly how many questions we have. A lot? A few? None?
I'd like to make a comment.
Sure. Curtis, you make a comment?
Well, while you're waiting for questions, Linda and I are old buddies. We've worked together for a long, long time. But I think part of what she has pointed out is what I'm trying to address. We should have staff doing a majority of the reviews, and part of the new process we hope is coming are written opinions on what's going on, because the commissioners should not have to deal with 80 or 90 cases a week. You don't deal with them that way in Boston and Cambridge, and that's part of the problem. The commissioners they may not apply the same standards to every place. I'm not sure that's correct, but maybe it is. But they're looking at every single piece of paper that comes down the road, and it takes time, and it takes time. In the meantime, we need the professional staff to review these plans, to give the commissioners highlights and recommendations so they can be more efficient and don't have to spend so much time on every single application.
Can I respond to that while we're waiting?
Sure. Can I have the questions also, if there are any?
Not too long ago, we started doing a consent agenda, which this is our agenda for next week. It's 3 pages. What we do now is at the very beginning of the meeting, we pull out as many things that are by rote as possible and vote on them all at one time. So we have taken that step to do that. We used to get staff recommendations, and for some reason, when the current administrator was hired, we stopped getting staff recommendations. That is on our list of things to do, because a lot of times we'll just say, per staff recommendation, we approve or we continue for revisions. So that is part of what we're trying to do. As far as not having enough staff, the current staff is doing half what they had to do before, Curtis. I'm not sure you're aware of that. The current staff under the PLUS reorganization doesn't do their own budget anymore, doesn't do the postings anymore. They get help from the staff in the middle, all the ladies that are supporting everybody. There's one person in the staff in particular, Ann Barrett, that is doing a yeoman's job in support of the HDC. But a lot of the things that the staff used to be responsible for is now being taken up by the support staff. So theoretically, there should be enough time to do application reviews, but not on all the applications, just on the ones that are the most critical, the old historic districts and some of the big projects. That's where we're headed. It's not possible right now until we get a lot of other things streamlined, because the process of applying to the HDC is really onerous. I wouldn't want to do it.
Okay, here's the first question. Isn't the desirability of experience and expertise an argument for appointing versus electing to the HDC?
I'll answer that.
All right.
Let her go first. Well, all right, I'll give you
Go ahead.
my opinion. The idea of appointing, as in the other major HDC areas, Boston, Cambridge, is that you can reach out to builders, architects, engineers. We've done that with the Board of Health, getting a broad range of experience. So I think that it gives us the opportunity, first, people who are interested in the HDC but don't want to go through the rigor of the elective process, and it's horrible because I ran twice and got beaten both times. But there are people who are interested who will step up, and if they were able to be appointed, they could move into the board and do a decent job. So I really feel that that would bring out more talent. And I'm reminded, for example, on the Board of Selectmen, while it's not appointed, look at the yeasting that takes place in the board. People tend to serve for a term or 2 or 3, and right now we have 7 candidates for selectmen who have stepped forward. I think that would happen with appointments for the HDC also.
Okay, Linda, do you have anything?
It hasn't in the past.
We have
Yes, there have been vacant seats that people have been appointed to. That's how I moved from alternate to regular member.
Okay, here's a question that I think brings up some new material. What are the exact criteria for being on the advisory boards? Number 1, being a town resident, question mark, having been actually on the island at least a certain number of times a year, number 2, and number 3, certain professional degrees. Maybe you each would like to comment on that, and I'll pass it down so you can.
Why don't you go first?
Look at it.
Advisory boards are generally made up of people who live or own a home in those areas. We have had in the past people who were on these advisory boards, given the remoteness of Tuckernuck and Sconset and way back, that did live off island, that came up for the meetings or some other way got the plans and were able to respond. So you don't necessarily have to be a year-round resident, and you don't necessarily have to own a home. You just have to sort of have a knowledge of the area that's being discussed. We have one in Sconset, one in Tuckernuck, one in Matticat, and we're looking at other things. And we have the Historic Structures Board that deals with the downtown historic area. Some of those people don't live downtown, but they live here. They know downtown. So there isn't really any hard and fast criteria. If you have an interest, you have an understanding of the area that you're going to be dealing with, that's good enough for us. And people are not coming out of the woodwork for the advisory boards either. So if they were interested, and there are all these professional people out there that don't have a conflict of interest because they are actually appearing before the HDC or still working in the trades in the town, and we were smacked by the Attorney General or the state several years ago because we had people who were building trades and architects on the board, and they said, not a good idea. So these people are not just flooding to the HDC. Get on an advisory committee, but there really isn't any hard and fast criteria for being on one except a general caring and knowledge of what you're dealing with.
The Act establishes, this is 1955, the Act establishes a Historic Districts Commission of 5 members who shall be resident taxpayers of the town to be appointed by the selectmen. I'm not sure that applies to advisory boards, but that is the original act, 1955. And again, if I really urge anyone who's interested to get the Preservation Trust memorandum. It is so informative, and it points out that in other communities, you reach out to the professionals. And in the case of the Cape Cod district on 6A, you are required to have either an architect or an engineer or a builder as the appointed member of those boards. It's in their enabling legislation.
Can I point out, though, Cape Cod Commission, or the group that handles 6A, Kings Highway.
Well, it's six HDCs.
Yep.
But there is an overriding commission, and the chairs of each of the 6 local districts form the Kings Highway Commission, and they meet and discuss things of significance on 6A.
The issue is they're not living in the same town. The way they told us from the state years ago was that if you had somebody like that from Cape Cod sitting on our HDC, that would be different. Being is that everybody lives and works in a self-contained community, the conflicts of interest was an issue. Things have changed a lot, Curtis, since 1955. The advisory boards are set up by the HDC as purely advisory. We have a signed advisory committee as well, and they're very active. It has nothing to do with 1955 anymore. Things have changed in 1970. There have been several modifications to the Act since then through home rule petitions. We've got to move with the times. We're not going backwards. We're going forward.
Well, as an advertisement for anybody who might conceivably be interested in serving on one of these committees, it sounds like you should start with the premise that don't rule yourself out because the criteria are subject to interpretation, flexible, and we need expertise. Have anything you want to say at this point on this topic? We have about 30 seconds left.
Well, I do, and I think, as you can see from the presentation here today by the 2 proponents of their positions, that there's a lot of passion on this subject. And the Finance Committee held a separate hearing where we listened to Mr. Barnes and Ms. Williams, and I think we came to the conclusion that we didn't recommend any of the 3 articles, and primarily because there could be unintended consequences to tinkering with any of this. And on balance, over the years from 1955, we believe that the HDC has done a marvelous job maintaining Nantucket, and therefore we didn't want to necessarily get into the weeds on this. It's too important, and we recommended to take no action on these 3 articles. I do think the HDC is reacting to the public outcry that there are things wrong, and they're trying to look at themselves and change their regulations and process so that things can be smoother for the public as they move through the system. So we would suggest that you follow our recommendation and take no action on these articles.
And the HDC appreciates your recommendations.
Sounds like we have a good diagnosis and we're in search of a cure.